Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. I gave you a partial overview of some of the, at the high level of some of the stuff we've been working on. There's many other topics that I didn't have time to get to, but I thought it was more important to also give some of my colleagues, some of the members of my group to dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics. So first, Lefteris, a PhD student who's been focusing on deep in this, will talk a little bit about, get a little further into the design of OmniLedger, how it works. Then Nicolas Gailly will talk about how the randomness that I mentioned is very critical to this process works, what makes the randomness problem hard and interesting, and the ways we're looking at solving it. And then Linus, who's my group's lead software engineer, will talk about a sub-project called Pseudonym Parties, which is our attempt at exploring a better alternative to get away from proof of work and to get away from the need to waste this ridiculous amount of energy to get a very tenuous form of decentralization like Bitcoin currently has. So
okay, thank you. So hi, I'm Lefteris. I'm doing a PhD at Bryan's lab. I'm on my third year and continuing. I'm going to talk about OmniLedger. It's our secure scale-out decentralized ledger using sharding. First of all, I of course want to acknowledge my co-authors, Philip, Linus, Nicolas, Eva, and Bryan. You've seen some of them or most of them. So let's start. What is our motivation? I'm sure you've seen blockchains. I'm sure you've seen the huge hype of blockchains, of how they're going to revolutionize the world, bring world peace, and all the other stuff. Some of that hype is fake, but there are some legitimate applications. With blockchains, we can bring more transparency into our digital world. We can minimize or even remove some trusted third parties, which gives us better security guarantees. And we can also create cheaper and faster transactions, better than our current banking system. So anyone that has looked a bit into Bitcoin has heard this talk of how Bitcoin is super inefficient. I'm sure Bryan talked about it before, that it has very low throughput, 4 transactions per second. It's like being on IKEA on a Saturday, basically. And the confirmation latency is 10 to 60 minutes. So if you want to buy coffee with Bitcoin, your coffee will be cold in the end. In OmniLedger, as you can see, we got a lot better metrics. I'm not going to focus a lot on how well we did. I want us to focus on the last row, which is actually how the system behaves. It's not the actual numbers, but the behavior. So in Bitcoin, if we give it more resources, which means that we have more miners mining, we have more hardware, more CPU power, more memory, we don't gain anything. The performance remains the same, and actually it might decrease a bit. And our focus on OmniLedger was to create a system where the performance will increase if we give it more resources. And that's what we get, linear increase in throughput. This is an idea that you have if you look into distributed systems. For example, if you use BitTorrent and you have more peers, then you get more bandwidth. Same goes with Tor. If you have more onion routers, you get more bandwidth. So why not in a distributed system like Bitcoin? And this is what we call the scale-out property. So how do we scale Bitcoin? First, we looked a bit into related work, and we realized that there is a trade-off triangle between a decentralized system, so no trusted party, the scale-out property that I just described, and security. And OmniLedger is the first proposal to achieve all 3 properties. Some other proposals that inspired us was Elastico, which was the first to propose an open sharded blockchain. However, in order to be decentralized and scale out, it had to sacrifice security, especially on the long run. We also looked into RSCoin. RSCoin creates a scale-out blockchain by assuming that there is a trusted party. We assume there is a bank. And now, using that bank, we want to create some transparency. So it achieves what it claims, but it's not decentralized by design. And finally, some work that we did for OmniLedger called BizCoin, where we create the system that works in the exact same setting as Bitcoin, but actually provides a lot better throughput and latency. However, it has the same problem as Bitcoin. If we give it more resources, the actual throughput doesn't increase. It might actually decrease a bit. So if we illustrate what no scale out means, is we have a blockchain, like Bitcoin's blockchain, and we have transactions. The transactions get validated one by one, and then we get more resources. Our blockchain grows bigger. This doesn't really change anything. We still get one block, we validate it, we wait, we get another block, we validate it, we wait. So making blockchains bigger and bigger actually doesn't help us at all, and that's not really a decentralized system if you cannot take advantage of the decentralization. So what we do in OmniLedger? In OmniLedger, we create what we call shards, which are actually individual blockchains. A shard works just like any other blockchain. It has transactions, and it validates them. When we get more resources, we don't just put them in the shard that we had. We create a second one. And this one also validates transactions. But both shards can now validate transactions in parallel. So the throughput doubles. And if I have more resources, I can create 2 more shards and then quadruple my throughput. And that goes on. However, it's not as easy as I just showed. You can't just plug blockchains and expect everything to work perfectly. There are questions like, how will validators know which blockchain the resources should be used at? Or how am I going to transact if I have some money on my green blockchain and I want to buy something in my yellow blockchain? To answer the first question, the simple idea would be, let's let the validators choose which blockchain they are going to validate. However, that's not secure. It's very clear that if I let the validator choose whatever he wants, then he can just take all his hash power, put it on one blockchain, and basically destroy part of the system. And we want all the system to be secure. So we need a way to assign validators in shards that cannot be biased. So it has to be random. And it has to be random because that's the only way we can create security proofs. For example, if you also look into the OmniLedger paper, you will see this graph that shows that if you want to have security in an adversarial environment where you have like 25% of an adversary, which is the usual adversary, then you need big shards of 600. Yep?
How do you compute this function here?
So basically you look into binomial distribution, and it's basically binomial distribution argument where you have an unlimited set of validators, and you say we have 25% chance of picking one validator to be malicious and 75% chance of not picking a validator to be malicious. Then, because we have a BFT protocol, we have an upper threshold per shard that no shard should have more than 33% of the adversary. And basically, you vary the amount of random picks you do, and you look into what is the failure probability. So that runs for 10 to the minus. So this will mean that the shard will break 1 in a million. If you want to go to 1 in 10 million, then actually the numbers will go higher. So that is the basic idea of a scale-out blockchain. You have multiple shards, and they validate transactions in parallel, so you have multiple blockchains running in parallel. If we decide to create a simple blockchain that does sharding, we can go like what we call here simple ledger. So we assume we have a set of validators that are elected somehow. For example, they've run proof of work the previous epoch, and
this is related to the previous slide. Can I still ask?
Yeah.
Okay, so assuming that I just assign each participant one random how do you call
shard.
A shard, yeah. So it means that it's like uniformly distributed properly, right? So
Yes.
if we have X% of all the participants malicious, it means that the shard will have like X%.
Yes, almost.
In the expected value, right?
Yes.
So like why cannot you use actually like 50%? Because
So that is a part of the inside consensus protocol of the shard. We use a Byzantine fault tolerant like PBFT, which has 33%. In principle, you could use Nakamoto inside, which has 50%. It will create smaller shards, but I'm not sure the trade-offs of using Nakamoto consensus will help you a lot.
Yeah, so to add a little to that, the 1/3 requirement for true Byzantine consensus protocols is a is a true, fully, formally provable guarantee. Bitcoin doesn't violate that.
No.
Bitcoin achieves, quote, 50% tolerance only by assuming that the network is never split and not under the adversary control. So a true, fully secure Byzantine consensus protocol assumes that the adversary can also control networks, which is in practice the case as well due to various BGP attacks and stuff. And so that's
Exactly.
ongoing debate whether whether even Bitcoin is really 50% tolerant or only 33% or less in practice.
Yeah. So in general, we want to create systems that are secure by design and not by faith. So we use Byzantine fault tolerance. So okay, let's create a very simple sharded blockchain. We have those three shards. Each one has its own blockchain. They run together. First, how do we assign validators? We have a big group of validators. For now, we assume a trusted random beacon. I'm sure Bryan already told you that we don't. We have better than that. And we use that to assign the validators randomly to shards and make sure that all shards are secure. Once we have assigned the validators into shards, they go to the blockchain of the shard they're supposed to validate. They crawl it to get up to date, and then they start running consensus. So as I said, we run Bitcoin consensus because it's scalable and is Byzantine fault tolerant. But if someone wants to deploy it with Nakamoto consensus, then you can tweak it correctly and wait enough to make sure that also works. That is a very strawman design. It has multiple problems. It's not decentralized. We have a trusted randomness beacon. There is no transaction processing during the validator reassignment. So at the beginning of the epoch, we have to wait for everything to get, again, back and running. And we cannot transact across shards. And on the performance side, I'm not really going to talk about those much. Bitcoin is not very fault tolerant. We have high storage costs because we're creating a blockchain that has thousands of transactions per second throughput. And if you try to store all those, you're going to run into terabytes and petabytes of data very quickly. So you need a way to prune your blockchain. And there's a trade-off between throughput and latency that I'm going to briefly discuss later. So this is basically the full outline of how we go from the simple ledger to Omni ledger. I'm not going to talk about all of those stuff because you also want to go. But in headlines, we create distributed randoms to do sharding. We create smooth epoch transitions in order to not stop at the beginning of every epoch. We introduce atomics, which is an atomic cross-shard transaction protocol in order to be able to transact across shards. And on the performance side, we change a bit Bitcoin to make it more robust and call it Bitcoin X. We do checkpointing to prune the ledger, and we do something I call trust but verify in order to bridge the throughput versus latency trade-off. So let's talk only about three of those. First, sharding via distributed randomness. So as I said, we want a fully decentralized way to create randomness. I'm sure Bryan talked a bit about RandHound, which is our way of creating unbiasable randomness, but it's not fully decentralized. It actually needs a leader to drive it. And in order to circumvent that need for the leader, we actually use another random generation protocol that uses verifiable random functions, which are some special functions that anyone can evaluate and create a random number and prove that this is an actual random number based on his private key. This, the first temporary leader election, is not unbiasable. Actually, if you have control over the network, you can bias it. And this is why we don't only use that. What we do is first, we run the leader election. We elect a leader, and then this leader runs RandHound. If the leader is malicious, then all he can do is fail RandHound, but he cannot really convince us that he has a random number for us. So we just restart until we find an honest leader that runs RandHound correctly, and the output is guaranteed to be unbiasable. As a result, when we actually get this final random number out, we can do the proofs that I showed before and make sure that the shards are secure. On the atomic cross-shard transactions, so how I'm going to use my green coins to pay someone in the yellow shard, we look into distributed databases and distributed algorithms into the protocols that are called two-phase commit or atomic commit. Those kind of protocols are usually, like I saw, first you have a coordinator that talks with multiple distributed servers and asks them if this transaction is okay to be committed. Then every server optimistically executes the transaction and either says, I accept or I abort your transaction. The coordinator collects all the answers. If everyone accepts, he is going to commit the transaction, while if someone denies, then he requests a rollback from all the servers and aborts the transaction, and we'll have a final acknowledgement. So if we try to replicate that protocol in Bitcoin, we run very quickly on an impossibility result. You cannot have two-phase commit in a Byzantine setting, simply because every time you ask a Byzantine node, can you commit? He's going to say, no, I can't. As a result, you are always blocked. So in order to solve that, what we do is we move one abstraction layer higher. We don't run two-phase commit among the individual validators. We run it in complete shards. Because of the way we designed the shards, they are Byzantine fault tolerant. So now they cannot lie to us. They are always telling the truth. And even better, they cannot even crash. They're guaranteed to eventually be live. So once you have that, it's extremely easy to create a two-phase commit algorithm that actually never blocks. So it's also non-blocking atomic commit. And the idea is very similar to the previous protocol. First, you have the client leading that is going to request every shard if this transaction is valid for them. Then the shards are going to basically run consensus on whether this is valid for them and put it on the blockchain. The client collects the proofs that this transaction is valid and then requests everyone to either commit, or if someone aborted, he requests everyone to abort. So it's very simple, and the security is just because the shards are secure by design. Finally, on the trust but verify protocol, the idea is to bridge what we call the trade-off between throughput and latency. And this is a very intuitive trade-off when you look into distributed systems. When, for example, you have a blockchain and you want to increase the throughput, you want to validate more transactions, the best thing you have to do is increase the block size, because then you validate more transactions per consensus round. However, this means that when you dispatch that bigger blocks, it will take more time to be broadcasted to every node on the network, and it will take more time for every node to revalidate it. As a result, it also increases the latency. So how we do bridge this gap is by giving the client the option to sacrifice some of his temporal security in order to get lower latency. And this is a very intuitive thing that we also do in our everyday life when we use our credit cards, where we can either do a contactless payment, which actually is not guaranteed to be valid. It reconciliates after 24 hours, or we can put our credit card in, wait to put the PIN in, and wait to get the confirmation. So it's very similar to that. We have two layers of validation. The first layer is the optimistic layer, where we have very small shards that validate transactions very quickly. The client can request the validation of their transaction on those small shards, and on reception of acceptance, he can go on with his life if he believes that the value of his transaction is so low that there is no incentive to be attacked. But if he wants to wait, there is a second layer of validation where we have these big secure shards that basically collect all the optimistically validated transactions. They revalidate everything, they catch all misbehaviors, and in the end, they create a final correct block. So if you're buying a car, you can wait 1 more minute to make sure that everything is fine. So on the evaluation, I heard you also had some questions, and here are the exact deployment settings. We used up to 48 servers that are connected on DeterLab. But in order to make a realistic network, we actually imposed 200 megabps bandwidth per client and 200 millisecond round-trip latency per server, so that the network is actually close to what the internet provides right now. And first, we evaluated if the system scales out. So we had one shard, then we added the second shard, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and we looked at the throughput. And as you can see, the throughput almost linearly increases, unlike Bitcoin that remains 4 transactions per second. On the max throughput, as you can see, we could get thousands of transactions per second. And based on the adversarial environment, with only 1,800 validators, we could get from 300,000 transactions per second in a weak adversary down to around 3,000 transactions per second for a strong adversary. And as I showed before, if I could double the validators, if I had twice the servers, I could actually get double the throughput. So that's not like the absolute max. It just depends on the amount of resources the system has. And on the latency side, if we have no trusted verify, we just have one layer of validation. The throughput was 5 to 15 seconds. While in trusted verify, the first level of validation was very quickly, 1 to 3 seconds, while even the second layer, which is slow, took a bit around 1 minute. So to sum up, this is a very quick presentation of OmniLedger. There is a very big and dense paper for anyone that wants to read it. And it introduces multiple protocols. I described a few. So Atomics provides two-phase commit in a Byzantine setting. Bitcoin Next, which I didn't describe, is an improvement on our Bitcoin protocol to make it more robust to failures, but still scale. In OmniLedger, we do sharding. We get throughput to Visa 11 and beyond. And it can actually be deployed in a proof-of-work setting, in a proof-of-stake setting, in a permission setting. It's actually orthogonal. Parts of the code are already online. We're working on more. If you want to work on us on making it real, talk to me, or on extending it, also talk to me. This is my email also. So thank you very much. Questions? Okay.
So I see since we're running out of time, Nicola, do you have what's the timing of your talk? Can you do a 10-minute version?
Yeah.
Easily?
Yeah. If I goes up, just give me a sign.
Awesome. Yeah, so just do that. Yeah. Okay, so.
Linus, je peux prendre. Ça a marché. It always work with me, but never on the presentation. It always work with never on the presentation. Faut juste que je me mette. Present. Okay. Hello everyone. Oh. Yeah, we have to use this. Hello everyone. Yeah, I'm Nicolas Gailly. I work in the DEDIS lab with all these nice people that you already heard. I'm a first-year PhD student, and I was this is Rosie. And I was software engineer before, so this talk will be a little bit more engineering focused, but still with containing some nice cryptography. So today I want to talk to you about randomness. So you might ask, yeah, what do we care about randomness? And I will try to convince you that it's important that we get good randomness. So why do we need randomness? We need randomness for plenty of stuff. For in real life situation, I mean, without computers, we need randomness for lotteries, we need randomness for jury selection, elections, or event audits. For cryptography, we need a lot of randomness. We need randomness in the gossiping, so how to choose which nodes to send a message. We need randomness when you select parameters of a group, how to choose my prime numbers, for example. We need randomness for cryptographic schemes such as Diffie-Hellman key exchange, like how do we select a new point, how do we create this new point, etc. We also run randomness in a lot of protocols, like in Tor, when you need to select which nodes are you going to, your traffic is going to pass through. You need to select this node among the list of nodes, and you need to select it randomly. Otherwise, if you select it always fixed, then your attacker can, of course, be very at these nodes that you will select. We also need randomness for sharding, for example, in OmniLedger, and for leader election in other blockchain type protocols. We also need randomness in statistics, and even for clearomancy. When you throw dice, we always need randomness. So there's a lot of application where we need actual good randomness. Now the question is the randomness always good, or is it random? So unfortunately, it's quite easy to have rigged randomness. So for example, the biggest example I found so far is for the lottery in the US. The actual director of information of the IT system for the lottery had put a backdoor in the randomness generator, and he was able to take out to always derive the right number, and he took out like $15 million for the lottery. And it was discovered many years later, and then now he's in jail and so on. But it's still a pretty good good theft. There's also this big story about the dual EC DBRG, which is a new type of pseudo-random generator, which contained weird randomness, and there was suspicion of having a backdoor inside it. So if some entity, supposedly the NSA, knew some special numbers, it could derive all the secret numbers that this PRNG will derive later on. And this would allow to decrypt many things, because this algorithm was supposed to be one of the standards, one of the 4 standards that meant to be implemented in many firewalls, in many VPN libraries, etc., etc. So it would mean to be able to decrypt a lot of traffic. And eventually we kind of have not a very formal proof that it was the NSA, but we can have some documents that led to suspicion toward the NSA. Also, on the opposite side, some ransomware, like the ransomware that hijacked your laptop and encrypts the whole hard drive, well, they sometimes use very bad randomness. For example, one used a timestamp, but then leave the timestamp in the clear to encrypt. So finally, it was quite easy to decrypt the whole thing. So we didn't have to pay him. So now, how to produce good randomness? Usually we use what's called a cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator. It must pass 2 main, I can skip some rules, but main 2 goals is we have to, from a sequence of k random numbers, we must not be able to derive the k+1 numbers. And we should not, even if we should not be able to derive the states of the pseudo-random number, even if we know these k random numbers. There's plenty of different definitions that we can look out for, but these are mainly for simplifying here. We can also inject over entropy sources into the system. So we have a pseudo-random generator in the Linux kernel, but we can also take from the randomness coming from the network, for every sensors, from the lights coming from outside, etc., etc. But even then, there's still plenty of cases where it's done badly. It's done in the wrong way. So for example, there's this duck attack, where they use the correctly pseudo-random generator, but they use a static seed key inside in the library. So it was quite easy to derive the next number generators. So we want something more. We want to be able to improve the state of randomness generation. We want to have this pseudo-random generator which is unpredictable, so we cannot predict what the next random number is. We want it to be bias resistant, so for example, if I'm the attacker, I can generate as many numbers as I want, and as soon as I see one number that fits my purpose, for example, it's the number I bought the lottery ticket for, then I can send it out and say, yeah, this is a random number. We don't want that. We want to be able to make the attacker unable to do this thing. We want it publicly verifiable. So this is a new notion here for some kind of randomness, not for every kind, but we want to be able to verify that the randomness generator scheme has been done correctly, has been run correctly by the nodes, and not in some weird fashion that we cannot control how, but we don't know how. We want it decentralized. Of course, I work in the decentralized system lab, so we want it decentralized. We don't want one party to run the whole thing and to have to trust this one party only. And we want it to be available. Of course, if my randomness generator is down 99% of the time, it's kind of useless. So we want liveness. We want to be always up and running. So some example of good randomness generator out there. So for example, there is this NIST organization, which is a very big organization in the US that takes care of standardization and basically that puts the standards for the next cryptographic algorithm that everybody should use. They have this randomness beacon which use quantum. Now new version we use quantum entanglement to derive randomness, etc. But we don't know really if it's really this number. We don't know where it comes from, etc. So it's a bit shady. But anyway, it's still better than most others. There's also Bitcoin. We can use Bitcoin to derive randomness, but still, again, it relies on some kind of weird assumption, and it also uses proof of work, which, we like to get rid of this thing. Recently, 1 year ago, we published at the lab, we published Renown, which is a paper about decentralized randomness generation, and which is exactly what we wanted, which achieves all the goal that we set up in the previous slide. And it uses solid cryptographic assumptions, elliptic curves, etc., so all is fine. But it's still, I think we can still do a little bit better. It's still a bit slow. It's a complex generation algorithm, etc. There's plenty of places where it can go wrong. So we might wondering maybe we can do something better. So here I present you DRN, which is a software written in Go, developed here at DEDIS. Which delivers numbers which are unpredictable, bias resistant, publicly variable, etc. DRN is completely decentralized. It's not run by one party, but a set of nodes that collectively work together to produce this randomness. It uses pairing-based cryptography. So pairing-based cryptography is a new type of cryptography. Basically, it uses a mapping between two groups to produce a third group. To map from 2 points in 2 groups to a third point in a third group, and it allows us to do some new fancy cryptographic constructions, and it allows for it has a lot of potential for new cryptographic schemes. And so how does DRN works actually? It works in 2 phases. There's a first phase is a setup phase, where all the nodes running DRN have to run the distributed key generation protocol. So they all collectively talk to each other. And at the end, they each have a share of a private key. But the private key, nobody has it. It's only shared by all the nodes. And to be able to reconstruct this private key, they must collaborate together. But they never have to reconstruct this private key. They only have to use their shares collectively to produce the random number. This is the generation phase. So as a DRN node, I just ask T out of N. So let's say there's N DRN nodes. I just ask T nodes to get me the partial signatures on the message I choose. Then they get me these partial signatures, and I bundle them together, and I get a full signatures, which is my randomness, which is unpredictable. I cannot know what will be the signature beforehand, before receiving these T signatures. So the generation phase is quite efficient. The setup phase is a bit expensive because it's O(n) squared communication time complexity, but the generation phase is super fast. Like I just send one request. It's like one client web server request. It's very fast. The software is really minimal. It tries to do one thing at a time and tries to do it well. It's already quite a lot. And even if it's still early stage, but it lacks some features yet. We need still to be able to renew shares. So I have a shares, and it's been 1 year I run DRN, but I need to renew it. As you all supposed to know, when you have a key, you're supposed to change it regularly, because otherwise, if you use it too often, we may be able to discover it, or you never know if you've been compromised, etc., etc. We want also to be able to add new nodes in the DKG in the setup phase, etc. There's a lot of features that we can talk more about later. The future of DRN is like to be able to try different organizations together to run these DRN nodes, to be able to create a network that can deliver randomness as a service. So in all your laptops here, you have this kind of NTP servers that fetch time from NTP servers. Ideally, we want to be able to do the same thing for randomness. That's a long-term idea, but we have to start somewhere. And which is why we are contacting different companies that are interested in this thing to try to run DRN nodes. Eventually, if you are interested, we are welcoming any participation here. And that's it for my talk. Thank you.
So maybe if you can just kind of get the basic concept, and then.
Okay, this is the conclusion, so we're done.
So I wanted Linus to talk about scalability and many of the problems we've been trying to solve. Another problem is how to get rid of this horrific proof of work, and is there a more reliable foundation of decentralization? And so this is one way we're trying to explore that.
Yeah, so the problem of anonymity versus accountability. So on one hand, one of the problems, as Bryan pointed out, is Bitcoin tries to solve this problem of Sybil attacks, so where one node could, or where somebody could just spawn 10,000 nodes and take over the network. So Bitcoin solves this problem with proof of work, saying that if you want to spawn up a node, you need to work. Other people don't have that possibility. If you want to sign up for an email, it's difficult to ask people to work. So sometimes people use things like CAPTCHAs. I like this one here very much. This will be one of the exam questions, so take note. I think the answer is 2. And on the other hand, if you ask people to sign up with ID cards or so, you have a problem that you have FBI listening and everybody will know exactly what you're doing where. So on one hand, you would like to have people signing up anonymously, and on the other hand, you would like them to have some accountability. Like, for example, Wikipedia, everybody should be able to participate, but if people start writing stupid stuff on Wikipedia, we would like to be able to block them. Same thing for Tor, for voting, for Bitcoin, as I said before. So one possibility is to do what we call pseudonym parties, where the goal is to link one physical person with one cryptographic token. So very short, you have organizers that set up the party. One of the organizers needs to be trusted. Then you have attendees and you have a room. And what you do is you gather all the attendees in the room, and at the exit you have one of the organizers, and each attendee has a private public key pair. So as he goes out, he goes to the organizer, and the organizer records his public key. And so at the end, everybody is out of the room, and the organizer has all the public keys. If you do this correctly, then you can assure that only one person could give only one public key, and so theoretically the organizer should have as many public keys as attendees. Then of course you can do quite a lot of things wrong. I won't go into details here. Okay, and then the interesting thing about this is that after the party, the organizers, they will publish the transcript of the party. We'll say, okay, these were all the public keys that we collected. And then you can do something that is called anonymous group signatures that allow you to prove that you were part of the party without revealing who you were. And you can do it in such a way that, for example, Wikipedia, it can know, okay, you are number 2. And if you write stupid things on Wikipedia, they will block number 2. However, if the same person goes to a voting booth, he will be number 10. So Wikipedia and the voting booth, they cannot collude to find that number 10 on the vote is number 2 on Wikipedia. So they cannot de-anonymize him. However, the vote knows that number 10 already voted. So if he goes back to the vote, it will see again, oh, it's number 10. And Wikipedia knows that number 2, he wrote some shady stuff. They don't want him to write more, so they will reject number 2. So this is some very nice things. And using this, as I said, you can do things like for Wikipedia, you can do votes because you know that he already voted. And you can also do something that we're looking into, do something like Twitter or so, where you say, okay, now everybody who has this public key, he can get some token, and then he can use these tokens to do tweets. And then you can avoid things like happened in the USA, where people just got 10,000 Twitter accounts and just started spamming Twitter. Some other projects we have at the DEDIS lab. So yeah, 4 minutes, not bad. And so yeah, if you're interested in any work at the DEDIS lab for master projects or so, you're very welcome to come and talk with us on dedis.epfl.ch. We also have some overview of our projects that we have. And yeah, I think that was 5 minutes. Good.
Okay. Well, yeah. So that's about it. I hope that gave you a little window on some of the an admittedly very biased sample of some of the things that are going on in security and privacy distributed systems research space. We did not use Randhound to pick our topics. And thanks again for taking the course. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. And okay, so of course we'll see you for the final. Yeah, so thanks again, and have a good. Well, we're still, you know, I have to be honest, we're still trying to figure that out. So, yeah, you know, no, but, you know, the most important thing is to, you know, a lot of the final will be on the, you know, what you've been doing anyway in the labs, you know, you know, techniques and, you know, exercises, things you've learned how to do or, you know, done directly as part of the labs. And also, you know, of course, you know, more, you know, theoretical, high-level stuff covered in the lectures. So, you know, just you know, review the slide decks, you know, and most of all, be, you know, thoroughly familiar with what you did on the labs, and you'll be fine. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Yeah.